friends. Welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast, where leaders of all sorts come to grow and expand their influence in healthy and holistic ways. I'm your host, Whitney Putnam, and listen, we don't often think about happiness as an essential for life. It seems like an add-on or something that's nice to have. Today's conversation is about two things: how critical happiness is in life and business, and the practical ways that we can cultivate more happiness in our lives. In today's conversation, we actually get to hear from Arthur C. Brooks and Erwin McManus. Arthur is a Harvard professor and best-selling author. He teaches courses on leadership and happiness. He's a columnist at The Atlantic, and he's the author of 13 books. Actually, he authored 2023's #1 New York Times bestseller, Build the Life You Want. He gets to sit down with Erwin McManus, and many of us in this community know Erwin, and in case you're unfamiliar, he is a favorite on the summit stage. He's also the founder of the Arena Mastermind for Optimal Performance and Mosaic, as well as a best-selling author. In this conversation, it actually took place live at GLS 24. So you're going to hear actually people listening into the conversation. It was during a lunch. You'll hear people eating, but we wanted to give this community a peek behind the scenes and give you guys an ear to listen into this conversation between Erwin and Arthur C. Brooks. So let's dive in.
This is so much fun. I can already look into the future.
Yeah, all right.
I absolutely loved your talk today. It was so insightful.
Since you're looking into the future, can we talk about the stock market?
Yeah, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, well, anybody can tell you that.
Yeah. But for me, it almost seems like an oxymoron, just from my personal perspective. Harvard and happiness. I can think Harvard success, Harvard and brilliance, Harvard and wealth, Harvard and power, but you don't usually think of Harvard and happiness. So before we dive into some of the questions about our inner world, how did that convergence happen?
I've done a lot of different things in my career, and one of the many great things about growing up in the United States is that you can reinvent yourself continually. I started off leaving college, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And and I went on the road doing the only thing I knew how to do, which was a musician. I was a classical French horn player all the way through my 20s, a lot of it in the Barcelona Orchestra, which is where I married my wife. And my parents call it my gap decade. And I made it back to college in my late 20s while I was still performing through correspondence education. I didn't have any money, and got my degree, and then went to graduate school, got my PhD, and became a social scientist. And I taught in a very conventional setting at Syracuse University for about 10 years. Then I left and I ran a think tank in Washington, D.C. as a CEO for a decade, and left that 5 years ago. And when I was 55 years old. So it was time to reinvent myself again, kind of take my career down to the studs, which I was pretty familiar with doing. But the whole thing is, when you're trying to reinvent yourself, you have to ask, what am I supposed to do? Now, I have a secret way to do that. It's called time on your knees asking the Lord, right? That's what Catholics call discernment. And discernment starts with a series of questions where you say, Lord, guide my path, and for once you actually mean it. And where do you want me? Where do you want me? And actually doing the work. And there's actually a structured set of questions that you can ask in prayers, et cetera. And that's what I did, and I realized that it was time for me to go back to my roots as a behavioral scientist and to use it for the good of the world. It was time for me to get into the mission field someplace. I felt that I was called to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas. And in so doing, draw people to the source of the strength behind these ideas, which for me is the cross and gospel of Jesus Christ. With that, as a scientist, I want to do the science, but I want people to look behind it. And so I said, how do you want me to do it? How do you want me to do it? And I got 10 offers from universities as soon as I came to that conclusion. Good universities that I would like to be at. And one of them was Harvard University, and I was negotiating with the deans of the business school and the Kennedy School. And one of the deans, he said to me, where else are you looking? And I told him the other universities and said, those are great universities. You should definitely consider their offers. And when you're done talking to them, come and you'll work for us because that's going to happen no matter what. Trust me. That's how confident Harvard is. They play heads up recruiting. And he was right. It was the best place possibly for me to go. So 5 years ago, I geared my apostolate toward writing, speaking, and teaching about the science of happiness for the public good. And it's been the joy and honor and privilege of my life. I get to do what I'm doing here today. What a beautiful opportunity this is, to talk to audiences of faith and audiences that not Christian audiences, and to talk to them about the secrets to building better, happier lives through love and through faith and loyalty, through responsibility and goodness. And I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, as many years as God gives me.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to ask you a chicken egg question.
Yeah.
Were you experiencing happiness before you began to research it?
Yeah.
Or did you begin to experience happiness more after you began to research
Yeah.
it?
So people ask me all the time, I mean, I must be really a happy guy, and that's wrong. I study happiness because happiness is hard for me. Now, I understand the basic science of why some people wake up in a good mood and why other people don't. 60% of that is genetic. 50%, depending on what studies you're looking at. Identical twin studies, where identical twins are separated at birth and adopted into separate families. That's not an experiment, by the way. It just would happen naturally. And when they're reunited at age 40 and given personality tests, you can find out what part of their happiness actually is genetic. It's about half. How you wake up in the morning. If you're one of those people who wakes up just in a good mood, I want you to know that you're annoying. But I'm not one of those people. I come from gloomy stock, you know? It's like there's a lot of problems. And I mean, I had great parents who loved me and gave me good values and raised me as a Christian, and I'm super grateful to them. But one of the things that was not a wonderful gift was natural happiness. And so, you know, the reason I study happiness is because I want it. I want it for me. And if I crack the code, I want it for other people. And what I've found is that there's really kind of a 3-part formula for becoming a happier person. Number one is, and by the way, this is the same 3-part formula as getting good at anything, golf or mathematics or whatever you happen to do. Learn it, understand it, number one. 2, practice it. And number 3, teach it. That's what you need to do. You know, my father was a brilliant mathematics professor. His whole career. And I watched him late in his career. He was lecturing advanced calculus without notes, just lecturing for an hour, advanced calculus. And afterwards, I was like, Dad, you're blowing my mind. I mean, how did you do that? And he said, I've taught it 100 times, 1,000 times. The secret is understand, change your habits, share with others. That's the formula. That's the reason I do what I do. I want to be a happier man, and I want to bring the happiness to other people. And so I understand the science, I teach it to others, I change my habits, recommend those habits to others, and I am a professor of this stuff. That's how we all can get happier. And I want a movement of people who are not necessarily wasting their time in graduate school, but are actually out productively doing things that you do. And to think of yourself as happiness teachers, as leaders, happiness teachers. That's the secret to a better world.
All right, so you're not a naturally happy person.
It's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing, yeah.
But one thing that seems to be very self-evident is that you choose very hard things. You chose the French horn, which is one of the most difficult instruments in the world. So you didn't choose an easy instrument to
I was
develop
8,
expertise.
so I can't, you know.
Yeah, but I think the rest of us would have quit. And you found expertise there.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it inside of you that drives you to develop that level of expertise in all these different areas that you've lived in?
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid and I was a musician. I actually started the violin at 4, piano at 5. I knew how to read music before I was able to read. I'm much more of a musician than anything else. In my heart, because that's how I was raised. And that's all I wanted, was to be the greatest French horn player in the world. I mean, America is such a weird country that can be your ambition. Right? And you're like, yeah, good. You want to be the greatest French horn player in the world? And any other country would be like, didn't you want like a job or something? Didn't you? So as a kid, I was naturally good at classical music, and that was incredibly affirming. And I had hardcore parents that would scream, practice. day after day after day. And when you get past the hump of self-discipline, you understand that this is really the secret to excellence. And excellence is its own reward. It just is. It's incredibly fulfilling to be great at something. And as a kid, I was unusually good at playing the French horn. What I didn't understand is that I was acquiring fungible skills to become pretty good at many, many other things. It wasn't about buzzing my lips into a length of metal tubing. It was really about the self-discipline that comes along with understanding what your difficulties are and getting past them by repetition, by playing things slowly, by being willing to fail. And so the result is when I stopped being a professional French horn player and went and got my PhD, I was working in a high-level theoretical economics program. It was extremely mathematical, and I was not up to snuff in my training. I knew how to get there because I had learned how to play the French horn. Everything in life is just learning how to play the French horn. Is what it comes down to. I mean, someday I'll write a book. It's like how to play the French horn. That won't be about the French horn at all, is what it came down to. And
See, somehow I knew that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, and all of you wouldn't be sitting in here if you're not good at what you do. You all know how to play the French horn too. You just probably haven't picked up the horn. You know all of the skills that actually go into that. And that's what makes something that's hard into something that's a challenge, that's fulfilling and exciting and a real adventure.
That's beautiful. All right, take us into the inner world.
Yeah.
You cannot study happiness without having to study stress, anxiety, inner trauma. Explain to us how meta-cognition relates to our inner world.
A lot of work that I do when I'm working with leaders, and my students I only teach MBAs at the Harvard Business School. They're average age 28. They've all gotten top flight bachelor's degrees. They've all worked in business. They're at arguably the best business school in the world, and they all want to grow up and be masters of the universe. They want to be great leaders. The problem is they don't know how to manage themselves. They don't know how to lead themselves. And they realize this. This is not some, I tell you don't know how to lead yourselves. They say, what are you talking about, professor? They all know that. They're super stressed out in no small part because they feel like they're being managed by their own emotions. The number one skill that I teach my students is how to manage their own emotions so they are not managed by their emotions. And that, in point of fact, is what all responsible adults need to know how to do. The worst parents are the ones who are being managed by their own emotions. The worst bosses are the ones who yell at you and then later have to apologize. And that's because they are being managed by a primordial part of their brains that are below the level of consciousness. This is the essence of how neuroscience can make your leadership journey much, much easier, and a lot of what I talk about. The human brain is based on a three-part structure, fundamentally. This is a theory called the triune brain. And at its base, it's a set of detection functions that you share in common with many lesser animals like snakes and lizards. Most of what you perceive right now is going on below your level of consciousness in signals that are being detected in your brainstem and cerebellum in the back of your head. That sends signals to the second part of your brain, which is much, much newer, between 2 and 40 million years ago, and which we have in common with all of the mammals. That's called the limbic system. The limbic system takes all these detections and signals and it translates it into this incredible language that we call emotions. This is where confusion starts. Most people talk about feelings and they want more good feelings and they want fewer bad feelings. It's a complete misapprehension, misunderstanding of how emotions work. Emotions are nothing more than data. They're data to you saying you have perceived something that's either a threat or an opportunity. Negative emotions, of which there are only 4 in life, fear, anger, sadness, and disgust, are the only 4 negative emotions that we have in combinations, are signals to you that there's something that's a threat out there, and you're supposed to feel aversion. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable. When something gives you a positive emotion, and the positive emotions are joy and interest and surprise, love is not an emotion because love is not a feeling. Happiness is not an emotion because happiness is not a feeling. I talked about that a little bit earlier today. When you have those, it's because there's something out there that Mother Nature says, approach that. It's good for passing on your genes or surviving. That's all emotions are. You do not want to get rid of your bad feelings because there are no such thing as bad feelings. You want to manage your negative emotions so they don't manage you and don't become maladapted and exaggerated. This is one of the big problems that we have with the therapy industrial complex in this country that tells every young person that if they're feeling aversive negative emotions, there's something wrong and broken about them and they need to cure them. That is exactly wrong. Your emotions are not a switch. Your emotions are a dial. and you need to be able to adjust the dial. That's what it comes down to. That's the reason that when you're feeling a lot of sadness and anxiety, going immediately to medication is highly problematic. It's a misunderstanding of who you are, makes it harder for you to manage yourself. Not to say that the medication is wrong, it's just that it's not the first approach to understand how these things actually work. This is what I'm explaining to my students. I say to my students on the first day of class, you're studying at Harvard. If you're not sad and anxious, then you need therapy. Right? And that's if you're putting one foot in front of the other in the world today, and you're not sadness and anxiety, something's messed up inside your brain. Get it looked at, right? Okay, then the question becomes, how do you manage your emotions, positive and negative, such that they're not managing you? This leads to the third part of the brain I didn't talk about, where I mentioned it this morning, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the bumper of tissue, 30% of your brain by weight, right behind your forehead. Emotions are then delivered to the executive center, the C-suite of your brain, right behind your forehead, this prefrontal cortex. So you can say, I'm feeling this, it means that, I'm gonna do this. That's what it's supposed to do. The problem is when that last link is severed. Lots of people are too reactive. They're being managed by their limbic systems. By the way, there's a whole class of people that can't manage their emotions. They're called little kids. And the reason is because literally they don't have the synaptic links established physically between their limbic systems and their prefrontal cortex. Those links are not complete until very late. On average, women don't have that complete wiring until they're 21, and men until they're like 70. So when your little kid is screaming and you're saying, use your words, what you're saying is, don't be so limbic. Use your prefrontal cortex. That's bad parenting to say that, but that's the point, that you're actually literally, this is what you're trying to get them to do so they'll establish this and get more practice, et cetera, et cetera. My job is to help people be less limbic. And the way that I do that is giving them a series of techniques that manually moves the experience of their emotions into their prefrontal cortex and gives them time and opportunity to reflect on these emotions, decide what they mean, and make conscious decisions that make sense for their lives. That's called meta-cognition. Fancy word, easy idea. How are you going to do it? Lots and lots of ways, by the way. Good therapy, by the way, is a meta-cognition technique. It's where you understand yourself better. But there are many other ways to do it. Journaling is phenomenal. When you're writing down your emotions, you're using your prefrontal cortex instead of your limbic system. That's what meditation is supposed to do. My favorite is called prayer. Prayers of petition. Bring your concerns to the Lord. What are you doing? You're metacognitively moving the experience of your emotions into your prefrontal cortex, delivering them up to heaven and then getting some advice. It's the single best metacognitive technique I've ever heard about in my entire life as a professional. I strongly recommend it to you. That's why, Jesus talks about, bringing me your concerns, bringing me your needs. Ask for what you want. Otherwise, your desires will be managing you and you won't be managing them. And that's no way to live.
So how does this relate to your concepts of emotional contagion?
So emotional contagion is a very interesting phenomenon that neuroscientists and social psychologists have been writing about for the last 20 years, which they notice that when you're around somebody who's happy, you feel happy, and somebody who's sad, you're sad. And the closer you are to that person, the more love you have for that person, the more likely you are to catch their emotions, as it were. We know more and more about the physiological mechanisms behind emotional contagion, including there are a lot of neuroscientists who believe in the existence of something called mirror neurons. Neurons are nothing more than nerve cells in the brain. And what you find is that there are some in particular parts of the limbic system that mirror the emotional cues and signals that you're getting from somebody that you love. Why? Because we are a kin-based, hierarchical, tropical species, we Homo sapiens. Now, some of that can be overtaken by events. You can live in Chicago, even though you're a tropical species, because we've invented this incredible thing called coats. But there are certain parts we're never going to get away from, like the kin-based part and the hierarchical part. And the way that we can actually live in kin groups is for us to actually relate to each other's emotions, to help each other, understand each other in a way where we don't actually have to spell it out all the time. I see you're angry. There's got to be a good reason that you're angry. And if I'm your kin, I'm probably angry too. So let's go. Let's go, go, go. If you're sad, there's probably a reason for your sadness. And I want to help you because we're kin. We're kin. We're together is the way that it works. And if you don't, by the way, If you can't relate to other people emotionally, you might just wind up walking the frozen tundra and dying alone during the Pleistocene. This is highly adaptive stuff from an evolutionary basis, and it's something that we should all feel pretty comfortable with and even grateful for. But that's the reason that you catch emotions. Now, this practical stuff too. That's why you want your kids to be around happy kids. That's why you don't want your kids to be around like the kid who wears all black and is bummed out all the time. Right? That was me in high school, by the way. Right? Still kind of me. Anyway, that's because you don't want your kids to catch the emotions of other people. And that's the reason that you're concerned about, the emotions of people that are living in your house. That's one of the reasons that families can be spiral downwards because of mirror neuronic activity and the emotional contagion that goes on. The more you understand it, the more you know, the more metacognitive power you have over this, and the better your kin group, AKA your nuclear family, can function.
All right, you are like a fire hydrant of information and insight, and you have 13 books.
Yeah. They're not all good. I mean,
but there's something good in all of them.
Yeah, that's right.
No, but I have two questions. I want them almost side to side.
Yeah.
What is one of the most important ideas that you found is easily transferable for people moving toward happiness?
Yeah.
And what is one of the most important ones that you find to be most difficult to transfer?
Yeah. So a lot of the ideas on happiness are they're only difficult because we have misconceptions about happiness. We have a whole bunch of mistakes that we make and the popular culture tells us that are quite wrong. For example, you can be happy. That's a lie. You can't be cosmically happy. I talked about that in my talk today. Look, I believe that you can be cosmically happy as a supernatural experience. It's called dying and going to heaven. But until then, sorry, you're going to have negative emotions and experiences. That's called life on earth. Our Lord suffered. It's amazing to me how many Christians, they're allergic to negativity. I mean, you want to find Jesus, our Savior, died on a cross, not a happy day, right? And who are we that we're going to actually not feel these negative emotions? Who are we that we're going to try to get out of these negative experiences? On the contrary, that's life on earth. And that's part of the salvation experience, is actually living fully to the max every single day and giving, even if you can, thanks for the pain and suffering and sacrifice. That's that's graduate school stuff for Christian love. Okay, so that's the first thing, is this idea that we can be happy. No, but we can be happier. It's a question of progress. That's the important thing for us to think about and once we do that, then a lot of things get easier. A lot of things become more manageable. Let's figure out where you are in your happiness journey. Let's figure out what the impediments are. Let's find out the reasons that you're having the experiences that you are. And then let's work on the margins. Do you need to get happier? Do you need to get less unhappy? These are different parts of the brain that are involved. We have different techniques and protocols that we can put in place in your life. And if we do that, then we can actually start getting happier. That didn't exactly answer the question of what's the easiest thing, but it's the most natural and comforting thing. Why aren't you happy yet? Because you're still on earth. That's why you're not happy yet. Good news, you can get happier. Now, that actually leads to one of the hardest things that people don't quite understand, because it goes so against Mother Nature. Mother Nature has got it in for you, for your happiness, because she actually lies all day long. If you do this, you'll be happy. If you do this, it's going to be great. If you hit your weight goal, then everything is going to be okay and everybody's going to love you, right? She lies and lies and lies and lies because she wants you in the hunt. She wants you to be a successful human being by going after the prize all day long. The hardest thing that I have to explain to people is that the prize is no good. I explained that a little bit about haves and wants and satisfaction, but there's this really interesting concept in the world of social psychology that we see again and again and again called the arrival fallacy. I'm reminded of it right now because we're all kind of watching the Olympics. If you could get through the opening ceremony, which was deeply un-Christian experience of the opening ceremony, you could actually watch the games. It's interesting. I have a lot of data on Olympic athletes, and what you find is that gold medalists are very likely to suffer a clinical depression in the month after the games. And the reason is because they convinced themselves for years that if they won, they'd be happy. That's why. And by the way, you too, you're all successful. I have evidence. I have data. You're sitting here. And you know perfectly that feeling you get when you get what you want and you're like, why is it that diets fail in 95% of the cases, it's not the technology. It's very easy to lose weight. The problem is that when you hit your weight goal, your prize is never getting to eat what you like ever again for the rest of your life. Congratulations. You know? So this leads to the truth, which is that happiness doesn't come from arrival at anything. That's the arrival fallacy. Happiness comes from progress. Happiness comes from progress. And it has a deep theological basis to it, right? Because what's life on earth? Progress toward heaven. Help me make a little bit more progress, Lord. Bring me a little bit closer today. Help me not to go in the wrong direction today. Just let me get a little closer, just one more good day, one more. And then there's the ultimate arrival that matters. But if we're trying to actually find the arrival before we get to that point, neuroscience and social psychology says it's going to be disappointing. So therefore, what we need to do is orient ourselves, and this is a hard change for people, to orient ourselves to progress per se. I want progress. My life is about getting better. My life is about loving more, about being a better father, about being more virtuous, about bringing the truth and love to more people. That's what it's really all about, as opposed to $1 million, $1 billion, whatever, because there's no arrival. There's nothing good there at the end of the day.
You had 4 quadrants.
Yeah.
Faith, family, friends, and work.
Yeah.
I don't think you really touched on work as much. And one of the things that was going through my mind, I kind of want to ask a slightly ideological question.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the cultural shifts that I perceive is that we have an emerging cultural belief that work is punishment. And it does move into some levels of Marxism and socialism in the way that we relate to work. Do you think that the decrease in happiness is related to our view of work?
Yeah. There are big shifts in the attitudes that we're instilling in young people about work. Now, to be sure, my generation has done a lot of harm, even those of us who are, I'm all about the free enterprise system, and I love it, and I'm super ambitious, and I work super long hours, and I've never worked less than 60 hours a week. I never have done it. That's not right. That's not healthy either. There's a lot of damage that I've done and if I basically said, like, you're not going to be happy unless you're breaking your back working all the time, that would be wrong. That would not be right. I don't believe in work-life balance because I don't think that life and work should be separated from each other. But at the same time, it shouldn't be all work. There should be something else that's beside work, which is why the happiness 401k plan has 3 other things: faith, family, and friends, which are not all going to be your work. They can't be your work, as a matter of fact. It's very important that you have a diversified portfolio of these things in your life. So when we talk about that, I'm very cognizant of the fact that it's easy for strivers to instill bad habits that don't lead to happiness in young people. But at the same time, I don't like the opposite. We shouldn't go from rail to rail. This idea that work is nothing more than striving without any sort of gain. On the contrary, I mean, that's actually completely contrary to Christian thinking, by the way. In the garden, before the fall, Adam and Eve were working the garden. They weren't hanging out in the garden. It wasn't a permanent weekend in the garden. The joy was in working the garden. Why? Because we're made manifest we're made in God's image, and God is creative, and God is generative, and God works, and that's a joy, and we're able to do that with our creativity and our hard work and personal merit and responsibility. What a joy, what a privilege that is. So to take all that away, either theologically or ideologically, is deeply problematic, and the data are very clear. The more idle you are, the worse you're going to be. You need breaks, you need vacations. You should go on vacation. I recommend that you take the day off on Sunday. Sabbath keeping is great. On the other hand, if it's all Sabbath, it's no good, is what it comes down to. And so we're trying to find a balance that's generative and creative, and where our hard work and personal responsibility help us understand who we are as people, while at the same time not becoming automatonic and obsessed, seeing ourselves as very special working success machines, which I think is a deep and grave sin as well.
All right. I don't know how many minutes we have left. 1 minute?
Got 1 minute. It's
Okay,
I'm going to give you like a 30-minute answer.
Well, I want to stretch this 1 minute.
There's no time. There's no time limits at Harvard.
You have some of the top leaders in the world here.
Yeah.
And some of the most committed people to the movement that's come out of the summit. Can you share with us something that you're working on, something that no one else knows, something that we can, you can give us the tea on.
Yeah.
Let us see the future a little bit.
I got a brand new thing. You want to hear my brand new thing? I don't know if this is any good yet, by the way. So
We don't care. We just want to know.
humor me. I'm writing a book right now that's going to come out in 26, and it's a book that tries to help people in their 20s get a good start. And the reason I'm writing this is because teaching 20-somethings, the big problem is they tend to be quite paralyzed. They're incredibly prepared, but they can't perform. Mm-hmm. And it's a very different thing. If an athlete that's unbelievably trained, but then that can't deal with the improvisation that actually comes on the field, is not going to be a successful athlete and won't even actually get out on the field to play. And so that's what I see. So this is a book about actually how to become a performer as opposed to just a preparer, somebody who's actually training. Here's the key idea, and this is a little. I don't know, maybe this is easy to understand. I'm not quite sure. I've been writing about this, and I've been hermetically sealed in my office. So let me give it a quick try. We only have 1 minute.
No, go ahead.
One of the things that we find in applied mathematics, which is my background, is that there's two kinds of problems that we face in life, and they sound just alike, but they're not. There's complicated problems and there's complex problems. Complicated problems are very hard to solve, but once you solve them, you can replicate the solution again and again and again. Like building a jet engine. We didn't have one until that many years ago, but now we can build them and you get on a plane and you don't crash. It's amazing. Complicated problems are like that. Once you solve them, they're solved and they don't change. Complex problems are the problems that you easily understand, but you actually can't solve. So your toaster is complicated. Your cat is complex. You understand the cat. The cat's got to eat. The cat wants to scratch. The cat wants warmth. The cat wants to go out, but you never know what it's going to do. That's why you love your cat, but not your toaster. You love complexity because your heart is complex, not complicated. It's true. Your heart is a complex thing. All of the things that we care about in life and that give us joy. A football game is not complicated. It's complex. You know exactly what winning means. I have more points than those guys. But you'd never want to simulate it on a computer, nor could you, because that wouldn't actually bring you any joy. You want to see what happens. Romantic love is the most complex thing of all. It's terrifying, it's scary, it's thrilling, because you don't know what's going to happen. Your heart is complex. God gave us complex hearts. The problem is the world gives us complicated solutions. The reason that young people today can't get started is because all they're getting is complicated technological solutions to the complex problems that are written on their hearts. You want a partner? You want to fall in love? Here's a dating app that reduces you to a computer algorithm and weirdly doesn't work. I have the data. More dates, less attraction. Why? Complicated solution, complex problem. What do you want in life? I'll give you a complicated solution and it won't satisfy. Are you lonely? Here's some social media. It's supposed to make people not lonely. It's supposed to reconnect you with friends. Literally, the more hours you spend on social media, the lonelier you're going to get. That's because the solutions don't fit the problems anymore. And if you want to get started on the playing field of life and get a lot out of your life, you need to learn to embrace complexity. That's what my book is about, is helping people embrace the complexity that is the true life in life. There you go.
That was gold. Come on, guys. Hey, can we thank Arthur Brooks? Thank you so much. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Pretty fascinating to get to go behind the scenes and hear a conversation between Arthur and Erwin, right? One of my favorite things that Arthur started talking about is what he called the arrival fallacy. And I just want to tell you a brief story of why I believe that is so true and it can steal our happiness. I was actually on a leadership retreat and I was participating in this activity where our leader, who was actually leading the retreat, had us choose one goal. Any goal that had been on our mind. And so I chose this one goal that had been deeply hidden in my heart. And I just whispered it to myself. And then this leader had us walk a maze as we were pretending like we were arriving at that goal. And at the middle of the maze, I was supposed to feel like I had arrived at the goal. And as I sat in the middle of that maze, don't get me wrong, I was excited. It felt good to reach that quote unquote goal. But I have to tell you something, that the feeling was very short-lived. And I wrestled with that feeling of the excitement and the exuberance of that goal being reached, feeling so short-lived that on my way back out the maze, I started getting really curious about that. And here's what came up inside of me. Enjoy the journey. And that's a phrase that I now live within my own story, because I realized through that experience that arrival fallacy, as Arthur coins it, can really rob us of the joy of being progress minded. And so I just want to invite you into that as well in your own leadership story. There's goals that we all want to reach, and they are incredibly valuable, and they are a huge part of our own stories and narratives. And don't forget to enjoy the journey along the way. Listen, we are so glad you are a part of this podcast community, and we don't want you to forget that the summit is coming August 7th and 8th. You can purchase your early bird ticket over at globalleadership.org/summit. Make sure to join us. We can't wait to see you there. Thanks for diving into this conversation with Erwin and Arthur with us, and I hope that you enjoy the journey.